Hey Mark, welcome. Welcome back. Great weekend of rugby. Wales. Got that one right? I didn't. Well, I did, but I didn't bet on it.
Yeah, what a great game though. I see in New Zealand some of the scribes wrote, what a poor example is this we're going to expect in the World Cup. We said the week before that it was going to be like a World Cup final. Two of the form
I said that this was Wales's World Cup game.
And I thought they were outstanding to dominate the game, 65% territory, 65% possession, and to not go their way initially when England went 10-3 up. You thought the old Wales may have buckled and then kind of blown it, but they were so dominant. It took them a long time to break England down. England's defence has been very improved, but I thought the way they won, the passion that was there. But what I enjoyed the most afterwards was Warren Gatland's comments to Eddie Jones, because Warren Gatland was very subdued in the build-up to the game.
Yeah. And he wasn't, as usual. Yeah.
But what he did say afterwards, well, he's now come to the conclusion that every big game that England play, they just don't do it. So maybe they haven't got it, and that they are chokers. And Eddie's responded by saying, well, he never realised Warren was a clinical psychiatrist, but maybe he's got a space for him to go and see him. So again, an interesting year, because the critique that always used to be aimed at the All Blacks when they used to go on tour and hammer someone by 40 points was they've peaked a year before the World Cup, they've peaked too early. When England beat them in between World Cups at Twickenham, it was they were going to win the World Cup, and then they had 3 awful years after that. They had that wonderful win against Ireland, smashed a very poor French team, and really were shown up as being fairly one-dimensional if they don't get that front foot ball against Wales, who potentially outside of the All Blacks, or even more so at the moment, the fittest team in world rugby. I think that's the biggest thing Gatland's improved. And watching Wales now is like watching Gatland's wonderful Wasp teams of a decade ago, where they won 3 European titles, and they were just so strong defensively, so physical, and then when they got 2 chances, they scored. So
yeah, it was amazing to see how many guys going back, not getting the gain line, but being smashed, monstered back. I mean, both sides. I mean, it was, you know, I don't know how many guys got injured in that match, but I'm amazed that anybody will run on in the next 2 weeks. That was a physical game.
It was brutal, and it was, you had said in terms of where to bet, not necessarily on the outcome, but bet on more converted penalties than tries. Spot on there. But I think again for South Africans to see, let's not remember the poor Welsh teams of the early 90s and mid 90s that came here and took 97 points. This is a very good Welsh side that's beaten South Africa 3 of the last 4 times. But it's also no disgrace to lose to this Welsh side in
3 of the last 3 times, I think.
We got Pox 1 in the last World Cup, eh? Yeah. So give us that one, eh? Yeah. 78th minute, but it was an escape. Farid Pre's try. Oh, for the days of Farid Pre. But they're a very good side. England's a very good side. This Southern Hemisphere arrogance also needs to be put in perspective. There's very little to choose between the sides. The interesting thing is to see how Ireland are struggling for the first time with this favoritism, and that they should be the best team in the world. They struggled against Italy, although I don't know if you saw the video of the bus trip to the ground, where Joe Smith was screaming, "This guy's a lunatic, this is suicide." They were going against the traffic with a police escort, and I think they got to the ground in 5 minutes, and I think they were a bit rattled, their players. And I had a similar experience in 2000 with the Springboks in Paris in an evening game. We couldn't believe how these guys were taking us, these police escorts. But what started to come out now with the Irish is Joe Smith's announcement that he's leaving after the World Cup and Andy Farrell is taking over. Are there 2 schools of thought that are going on? Are players already starting to think post-World Cup for Farrell and not Joe Smith? So doubts within the Irish psyche, definite issues within their squad depth. But I think if you look at all those Six Nations teams, the side that has built the most depth over the last 2 years, definitely Wales. And we saw that when Gatland's Welsh second stringers beat the Box second stringers in Washington, and then he took a combination to Argentina and smashed them 2-0. So yeah, very impressive. And I was screaming Wales, Wales, Wales on Saturday evening. It's the game for me, the game of the weekend, and I'll be surprised if we see as brutal a game in this year.
Yeah, I don't think we will, but it was great to be Welsh. I was in stunned silence. I just couldn't believe I'd given us no hope. from what I'd seen from England, I really expect them to win by 15 points. But well done to the lads, and it's 12 in a row now. We've got Scotland up next. Scotland can always turn this over in Scotland. So, and the Six Nations is by far from concluded. You know, Wales, I think, leading 12. England have got 10.
And the big one, Wales Island. You know, even though it's in Cardiff, it's again, you'd have to back Wales at home now to win. But they lose that one. England have got the easier run in now. You know, they've got Wales and Ireland out the way. So it's a great tournament when it comes down to that last weekend or the last match. Scotland, I feel, have regressed in the last 18 months. You know, there were signs 2 seasons back in that.
They just don't have the depth. You know, and they're missing a couple of players, so that shows.
Yeah, the minute the South Africans fell out, it was all over for the few Kiwis. So I think that was also, you spoke what a good bet it was, the 2-1 on a Scottish win in Paris. And they were very poor for a French team to roll them over like they did, because France is woeful at the moment. Yeah. And then Super Rugby, your bet spot on. Sunwolves, you said no ways by 20. They lost by 1. You won your money back there. And then
Sharks.
The Sharks, where
they're for me the form team of the tournament right now.
You know, just to remind people, you said how the bookies were making the Blues favourites away from home at a place where they hadn't won in a decade, against a side that looks very settled, and it was 19-0 at halftime, 26-7. But that humidity was also those games early season. I remember back in the days of Jonah Loma and Videri playing for the Blues, coming here with that potent side and losing to a Springbok-laden Shark side 24-8. When no one could even catch the ball, the humidity was so bad. So
you could see after 25 minutes, the humidity was, the Blues players were hands on heads, hands on hips. It looked painful for them.
And I felt there was a lot of criticism about the Sharks not sustaining it in the second half. I thought the effort was, again, clinical. It was good. They got the bonus point. They 10 points from 2 matches at the table. They've gone away from home. They dispatched a Sunwolves side that everyone said was woeful, but they lost by a point to the Waratahs, who should have beaten the Hurricanes and lost by a point. So you've said from the outside that form guide will only start coming into play by week 5, week 6. Yeah. At the moment, it's hit and miss, which makes this weekend's fixtures interesting.
Interesting, if not dull, from a betting point of view. The bookies I've looked at all the games, and the handicapping is pretty spot on for every game. You know, there's nothing that stands out that they've gotten wrong. I think again, for me, the Sharks playing Stormers. Stormers don't travel well. They haven't traveled well for years. 6.5 points is the spread there for the Sharks to win by 7 or more. You'll get 9 to 10. And I like that bet. I like the direction the Sharks are going. I like, you know, they were clinical against the Sunwolves. They were clinical against the Blues. I mean, I know there were some headlines. I think one of SA Rugby magazine's, our guys, headlines said, "Sharks hang on." I don't know what game they watched, but what was the final score?
26-7.
Yeah, 26-7. They did everything asked of them. So for me, I like the Sharks this weekend. And I also like the 8-10 on the Jaguars, or Jaguares, to beat the Blues.
Yeah, I would cite the kind of performance the Jaguares put in against the Bulls was more consistent with how they played last year at home. I know the conditions were awful, and but 27-12 and a comfortable 27-12. And I think they've got a pack that's going to be too strong for the Blues. We spoke before the Sharks game. The Blues have wonderful individuals and wonderful backs, but they don't have the pack to consistently trouble some of the biggest South African or an Argentinian side. And in Buenos Aires, I think they're going to have had a great week with stakes. They're going to have seen some beautiful women, and they're just going to get that 80 minutes out the way and head back to Auckland and hope for the best over the next month. But they'll be 0 from 3 after 3, and really that puts them, you know, a tough start to the tournament, but it really puts them under the pump, given their last 5-6 years history in being the great pretenders to the crown, but delivering very little.
Yeah, well, what a disappointment. Yeah, you know, they're still living on the form and glory years, the Blues, I think. What Bulls, Lions? What's your thoughts there?
I think Lions. I think they, again, I was very surprised at how they fell away in the last 20 minutes against the Stormers. but also within reason. I thought Egan Seconds' officiating was just so outrageously skewed in the favor of his former team. And when that game got to 85 minutes, it was like, is Egan going to walk that ball over himself and just put it down?
No, it was cringeworthy, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was just so obviously he was going to do everything in his power to ensure that the Stormers got a whiff of a victory or a draw. I think the Lions will feel that that was one at 14-3, having only lost once in the last 4 years in a South African derby that they should have put away. Those were lost points that could be very crippling to them at the end of the tournament. But I still fancy them to beat a Bulls side that again is going to be hit and miss. They've lost Lut, the Yaka again, and he's very influential to them. South African derbies, big attrition rate, and it's going to see who's standing again on Monday. Warren Whiteley out for 8 weeks, Lut out for a couple of weeks. The key there for me is that the players like Andre Pollard really has to be managed, because I think he's going to be critical to South Africa's World Cup. I would want to see a guy like Pollard not playing these South African derbies. He's got nothing to prove to Rassie that he's the number one in the country. All that can happen is he gets smashed in these derbies, and I think there is a difference between him and Yankees, and I think there's another difference down to who's number 3. And the key there is, if you look at our top 15, ideally that we want to have run on, who are capable of beating any team on the day. What is in plan to protect those guys where they get enough game time but they're not exposed to madness, whether it's a travel schedule or whether it's the brutality of a home derby. So I would go with home ground advantage for the 2 derbies, but I think they're going to be bloody uninspiring but brutal. Not quite Wales, England, but it's going to be tough. And
what do you make of Aka van der Merwe's?
Yeah, he's off to Sales Sharks with Rob de Preer. I saw the Sharks put out a thing to say, news to them, but I think if Dad's coaching and son's on his way, I think one knows about it. They both, Rob de Preer went over there and he had a short stint. And whenever one of the players goes for that 2-month or 3-month stint and they make an impression, you know that the big 2 or 3 year contract is going to be given to them. I think it's a good career move for both of them. When you're not in the top 2 and you get good money, go. Nothing stops you from coming back, and nothing stops you from being selected for the Springboks. They've scrapped the 30 test rule, which I think is the right way to go. If you want to be serious about picking the best side and giving yourself the best option for a World Cup year, why restrict anything? So if your best player in a position has played 1 test for South Africa or has never played for South Africa, pick him. Doesn't matter where he is. The way it works with Super Rugby being so dominant, you're never going to get more than 5 or 6 out of 35 that are going to come from overseas and go into the mix. But it's that depth that we're looking for in terms of building that squad of 30. So let's take the top 15 out of the mix and focus our energies on who's 2 and 3 in each position. Because if they're strong, you go to the World Cup with a very strong squad with a very good chance of winning it. You said at the start of the season, come September, how many players are still going to be standing? And that's why the focus for me is so emphasized on number 1. I'm looking at 3, 4, and 5 in each position and saying, do we have something that we can take to the World Cup and actually feel comfortable that hooker, that fly-off, that fullback can actually make the grade?
I get a sense Null is all right with New Zealand rugby.
Yeah, for the first time you've got well, firstly, the paranoia set in already. Australia's resurgence, okay? And a couple of seasons ago, the Hurricanes lost their first game against the Brumbies by 50 and went on to win the title. So those first 2 weeks' form is also you take it with a pinch of salt. But you've got where it used to be New Zealand first, All Blacks first World Cup year. Everyone buys into the resting program, which is well documented. No player could have played. No current All Black who toured November was allowed to play in the first in pre-season. They had to be integrated into the first 4 weeks of Super Rugby. They can't play more than 5 in a row. Then they've got to be rested, and when they get rested, they're not to come near in that week, not come near rugby. But you've got players who actually want to go back. Damien McKenzie played. He came off a honeymoon and he played, and that really annoyed Steve Hansen. Colin Cooper, the Chiefs coach, said he wanted to play. Okay, you've got Beauden Barrett who wanted to play. He was rested by John Plumtree because that's what Steve Hansen wanted. But there's an unease about the Super Rugby coaches who feel that their careers and their jobs get stalled because of the All Blacks, especially in World Cup year. And I think the fact that they won the last 2 World Cups has also got, there's not that desperation to do everything for the All Blacks. And it's like, if you lose this one, there'll always be 2023 to kind of get it right. And that's that arrogance that set in with the under-20 side when they won 4 or 5 in a row, that set in with the 7 side. And it's not just this unified, this is the way it is, and this is why we're #1 in the world. An interesting point that was made is Joe Schmidt took the New Zealand model and he copied it into Ireland, but he made it law. It was prescribed. You don't play him, and if you do, he doesn't play for Ireland. And he went to the provincial coaches and said, when I don't pick that player, you tell him it's because you didn't rest him. You didn't give him the time off. And there's nothing like that in New Zealand. And what the New Zealand media are saying is post 2019, whoever comes in 2020 needs to formalize it with Super Rugby coaches and say, this is just the way it works. National first, Super Rugby second. And I think we should be formalizing it as well, because Ireland is an example of how how Joe Schmidt in 4 or 5 years transformed that whole Irish.
You know what I think is amazing is the arrogance of any rugby organization to think, and soccer is the money game, is for them to think that they can do something that soccer even can't do. Because soccer doesn't have that power over the clubs.
No, not at all. I mean, it's and because of the money that's now involved in professional rugby and the lack of money that's involved in international rugby, the clubs have the power, and we need to accept that. And once our game goes fully professional in this country or in the Southern Hemisphere where it's private ownership, it would be very different as well. And that's why I would think reduce test matches in the year. If you're only playing 6 a year, you're also upping the ante of when that national team plays, and expanded Southern Hemisphere and Northern Hemisphere competitions that involve the best players in the world. So you could have 4 New Zealanders playing for Toulouse and 2 Frenchmen and a South African playing for the Crusaders, potentially. I think that would give it that global feel that we get in soccer. That rugby still falls way short in.
Yeah, for sure, it does. It's you know, Super Rugby is a good product, but it still needs some tinkering. It still needs to go down back to, they need to lose the Japanese side, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Super Rugby is lose the Japanese side, potentially lose 1 more South African side, and bring it back down to close to a Super 12 where you play 11 single rounds, go into a top 4 play, a home semi-final, and then the final to me should be played on neutral ground, because if you're in that top 4, you've earned the right to have that neutral ground final, and that becomes your big money spinner. And it's still in its current guise, there's too much mediocrity in it. I've enjoyed the start to this year's competition. I think there is an edge because of the World Cup year, but I also think the quality of rugby in the Northern Hemisphere, if you look at the European competitions and you look at some of the bigger games in top 14, especially the Premiership, it's far stronger than anything we have domestically here. And the only thing that makes Super Rugby so challenging is the vast travel distances. A side like the Blues travels from Auckland to Durban to Buenos Aires. That takes something out of the players. But when you look at the quality of the games, Northern Hemisphere rugby far more closer to Test rugby. We may still have the fast-paced games, but more so when New Zealand teams play each other, and that's always been the case. So lots to do with Super Rugby. I'm enjoying it though, yeah. And I'll enjoy this weekend's one. But I'm rooting for the Sharks. I think they've been the most impressive, as you said, of the South African teams. I just hope that they can kind of sustain it, and I think they'll be better when they're on the road as well, when they're not dealing with that humidity. And they're a side that showed last year they travel pretty well.
Yeah, they did actually. They had a couple of decent wins in New Zealand as well.
Yeah, they put that 60-pointer past the Blues, just lost in injury time against the Hurricanes. So they're a side that seems to have the measure of the New Zealand teams as well, and maybe that's something for Rassie to look at in terms of the formula of why have the Sharks so successful against New Zealand teams but struggle against an Australian team or even potentially the Jaguar Warriors.
Yeah, I expect Rassie will give you a call and ask you about that. Cheers, man.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah.